guys, welcome to my very first video in English. I'm Jessie, I'm a 6th year medical student. It's crazy how time flies, and today we're gonna talk about how to write a final thesis. First of all, I'm gonna talk about my process, obviously, because I only wrote my own thesis, and we're gonna go through it step by step. And just for your info, I did a meta-analysis. So if you're writing research or if you're writing a final thesis, you should meet with your supervisor. Your supervisor is your very first partner, of course, and she or he will lead you to the whole process. So what you should do first is schedule an appointment and talk about the main questions. What's going to be your hypothesis and what is the goal of your final thesis? You need to rule this out first. I can talk about my process. So my topic was metabolic evaluation in women with prior gestational diabetes mellitus pregnancy. So that means our goal was to find out, is there a difference between GDM women or a woman without GDM? And then, of course, how are the changes? Are they significant or are they not significant? After you found your topic, you can also create a brainstorm. And I did that, for example, with the app called MindNode. So everything that I thought of or thought about, I filled in in a brainstorming session, and I will show you the picture. Yeah, and I created a literature research. So I looked through PubMed and WebofScience. Those are two databases that I used mainly. Is there any data within the last 10 years, let's say, that proved significant changes? And if there is, how do they differentiate between in the whole world? So this is what I did. So the first step is the literature research, and let's talk a bit about it in detail. So the main focus here is your keywords, and you need to make some thoughts about keywords. So for me, for my topic, it was metabolic evaluation, GDM pregnancy. So GDM is the abbreviation for gestational diabetes mellitus. And then I also had certain risk factors that we wanted to evaluate, or let's say lab markers, for example, lipids, glucose, or what else we looked out for, blood pressure in general. So, and then I just added those keywords, and then like studies that were performed in the world or clinical trials would show up on either WebofScience or PubMed. My supervisor wanted me to use mainly WebofScience. That's why I looked through two different databases. Most of you guys also use Google Scholar, but it's not one of my favorites. And I would also recommend you to use WebofScience or, let's say, PubMed. Then it comes to the decision if you want to include the studies or no. So then you need to think of, okay, is it significant? Are those studies relevant for my hypothesis or not? So you always need to check your hypothesis or your goal of your work and to see, is it relevant or is it not relevant, right? So do you save your literature only as a link somewhere in your Pages document or in your Word document? Well, clearly you shouldn't do that. And thankfully, there are some programs that can help you. For example, this is just my personal experience. I used Zotero. Zotero is a managing tool for research files or data. And I can show you also how I implemented this into my research, and we can look closer to this program. Whenever I visited PubMed or WebofScience and I liked an article that I want to include eventually in my final thesis, then I just click the icon that you can see over here. I will blend you in the window, and then it just automatically saved the whole PDF file to my Zotero, and I can also create different files there, as you can see in the next video sequence. Okay guys, here you can see now the Zotero app, and as you can see, I have my library here. Here you can see all the files about the final thesis. So I kind of sorted it due to markers. So for example, blood glucose, cardiovascular markers, lipid metabolism, and also or my studies that I'm gonna include in my final thesis. So you can see them here. I kind of censored them so you wouldn't see what I include, but just as an example, So let's say we want to look at this one, and then you just double click it and it opens in the app, and you can see here the whole study, the whole document. And as you also see, I can mark things in the document in different colors. I can also make some notes on the side, and everything is saved. And also you can click here and you can put some notes here and say, hey, this study is really important, include into abstracts, for example. So, and then you see here that there is a note. And yeah, this is basically what I used for the organizing and just collecting all my studies and the final thesis writing. And I also have an folder with all the studies that I excluded, because in the end you need to write how many studies you excluded and what were the reasons. So yeah, this is about it, and I really recommend you to use a managing tool. There are also other managing tools, but for me it was just the easiest to use Zotero. This was the first I found and people recommended to me, so yeah. I also recommend you, obviously, to always communicate with your supervisor. Tell them how far you are, how many studies you found, how many literature reviews you found, and just basically communicate with them and update them, because sometimes you might be stuck and they might help you out. For example, I was feeling really stuck, so I asked my supervisor for advice. I said, hey, listen, these are my studies that I found. Maybe you have something else you want to include. Maybe you read something specifically. So then she sent me a few things, so I was really thankful for that, and it helped me get back on track. And how to process further. So let's say you have all your literature, you know what you want to include. Then the next step is to create data sets, or you use, for example, Excel for that. So I did that. It was a really painful procedure. It took a lot of time, but I managed it and it's really worth it. So I created different kind of files and tables. I can also show you a few of them. I will censor the data, because obviously I don't want to show you my results, but just to get a basic understanding on how I did that. I created different sheets, and on each sheet I had a different risk factor for what those data sets were, right? So I had 17 studies, and each of the study evaluated, let's say, a different risk factor. For example, the one study only checked the blood pressure, the other study included lipid markers, and some other study only had blood pressure and, let's say, body mass index, right? So each of the studies evaluated something different, and they had also different results. So what I did, I created like a first sheet in which I had all the data from the authors, then in which year those studies were performed, then what kind of markers and risks they evaluated, and then I had this overview, this kind of like, contents, what my studies include, which was also really helpful. And after that, I just try to create tables which include the author and their data. So what kind of results did they get? And then I compared basically all of the studies that were evaluating the same risk factor, and I put the data underneath it, right? And then I saw with the p values and with their results if there were changes or not. For example, studies in China had for the glucose values complete different results than, for example, studies performed in the USA, which can be indicative that, for example, people in the USA eat less good than, for example, people in China, just like as a very basic example. When this part is done, so if you extracted basically all your data from all those studies in your Excel sheets, then the writing is kind of easy, because you have everything there which is underneath each other, and you can compare it. You can say, oh, right, in this study performed by this author, the results were a lot higher than, for example, in this other country or in this other studies. Or you can compare and summarize the results and say, hey, the BMI in GDM woman was significantly increased after I collected all the data. I had another meeting with my supervisor, so in total we only had 2 meetings, one in February and one in August, and the rest went over emails. And she also sent me an example what she wants, how I should write it, in what kind of style I should like present the results, let's say, right? So she sent me one of her articles that she published with some other students together about GDM pregnancy. So this article was in Lithuanian, but it doesn't matter, I just translated it. And she also showed me how I should present the data in such tables, and I can show you here this example from the study. And yeah, that's basically it. So I'm done now with the writing process. I have figured this writing process out, or I sent her my final thesis draft. I'm pretty sure that a lot of those things need to be discussed one more time. And yeah, this was the how to do the final thesis writing if you have a meta-analysis and your own data. So please make sure to know what kind of thesis you're writing or what you want to write. And if you have any questions, make sure to write them in the comments. And thank you for listening. Please give me a like, and thank you for your attention, and make sure to follow me.